Buenas noches, buenas tardes. Para las personas que necesitan traducción en español, están ahí al fondo unos aparatos que pueden ponerse si quieren traducción. Okay? Gracias.
And I would love to translate that, but I'm not able to. So I want to welcome everyone here this evening. My name is Helmke, and I hope that you all received a program for tonight. Did you all receive one? Because that's going to help us move things along, and it's going to help you all get to know who else is here and who's talking. But there are bios within that program for you so that you'll know who's up here on stage. Again, I just really want to thank you all for being here, and this has really even started to fill up in the last 10 minutes since we got here. So that's very exciting, and I see more people are coming. So it is good that we all are here and that you're all bringing your hearts into this place. Basically, this evening, we're going to be introducing ourselves a little bit, but then we're going to be spending most of our time listening to this amazing group of people who have come to San Antonio out of their commitment, as well as out of their expertise, and to share with us and teach us, and we can all learn together as well. One of the things that we've been trying to do in San Antonio, especially as a faith community, to be smarter about the work that we're doing. There's no reason not to be smarter, because the information is available to us. And so I want to say thank you to all of you for coming tonight to this place, to the best city there is, anywhere. And but we're just really grateful that you're here. So thank you for that. So to begin, we're going to do introductions up here, but also introductions out there. And then after those introductions, we're going to be getting that expertise, some thoughts about next steps, but then also some more conversation out here about next steps for all of us who are here and living in this community. So I'm going to turn to, and I'm going to give them a couple seconds here, but I'm going to turn to our guest and ask them, why are you here tonight, really? And what is at the heart of this matter for you? Not just because Hope invited you, but why do you come to this work? What is at the heart of that? So, is anybody willing to go with that? And maybe say your name, and so you can start looking on your program so you know who's talking. So.
My name is...
Let's see if there's...
Garland.
Can you hear that? Okay, let's see if it's on.
My name is John Garland.
Still.
And I will project until the microphone comes on, and then it will be very loud, and then I will project less. I'm the pastor of the Mennonite church here in San Antonio, and I am here because I understand the Christian faith to be an intersection of hope with trauma. And we are called to bring hope and talk about the good news of hope to those who are most traumatized.
We're going to try another one.
And this one is on. So, well, I was supposed to use this one. Yeah.
Go with what works.
And so we do at our church, as a part of the Interfaith Welcome Coalition, we do a lot of work with welcoming refugees in San Antonio, and then our church specifically focusing on hosting those who are stranded here in this city.
My name is Helen Boursier. I'm a Presbyterian minister, and I have had the privilege of being a volunteer chaplain with refugee families since 2014. Most notably, for 2 years, I was a volunteer chaplain inside the Immigrant Family Detention Center at Garland City, where I facilitated art as spiritual care with trauma theory. And the art on the side wall over here was created by mothers and children while they were detained inside Garland City. And from that experience, some friends of mine have said that clearly, my time with the mothers has tattooed my soul. I love these families. They mean the world to me. And I am hoping and praying for a season when our country can truly say, bienvenidos, welcome.
Thank you.
My name is Paul Wise. I'm a professor of pediatrics and international studies at Stanford University. I work in war zones around the world, trying to protect civilian populations and improve the well-being of children caught in areas of profound violence. I've also been living and working in Highland, Guatemala for the last 45 years. And I'm here basically because in America, at least my America, cruelty is never an appropriate policy. Cruelty is never an appropriate deterrent to seeking asylum. And I'm very proud to join with colleagues, mentors, people I've admired for many years to give testimony and speak about this evening.
Hi, my name is Dr. Marcia Griffin. I'm also a professor of pediatrics, but my patients are on the border. So I serve children and families on the border of Texas and Mexico. And these are my kids, and they all come through my place. And so for over 12 years, I've been on the border, and I take care of immigrant children, and I also take care of I have been in almost all the Office of Refugee Resettlement shelters along the border. I've been in the Border Patrol processing centers and the Dilley Family Detention Center. And we are what's causing cruelty, and we have to take responsibility to stop it. So that's why I'm here. These children are my children. I would really have to be in the old adage, deaf, dumb, and blind, not to see how it's affecting my community and all the children, not just the immigrant children, but all the children in my community are watching.
Thank you for that. So my name is Dr. Aisha Khan. I am an assistant professor of emergency medicine at Stanford School of Medicine. I do work in global health equity and health disparities around the world, and a lot of my work is in refugee camps and humanitarian crises. And so when there's a humanitarian crisis going on our own soil, it was very hard for me to ignore and not be here. But the larger reason of why I'm informed to do this is I'm an immigrant myself. I came here when I was 3 years old. I was really fortunate to be naturalized and am an American. And one of the sayings that my parents raised me with was by a Muslim saint, and he said, you can destroy churches, you can destroy synagogues, you can destroy mosques, but do not destroy the hearts of man, because therein dwells God. And it occurs to me that many of the things that we use to define who we are, our race, our gender, our socioeconomic status, our jobs, all of these things in the eyes of God are probably meaningless. So what actually matters is what is in our hearts and the gifts that we were given and what we do with those gifts to protect the hearts of each other. So my work is most informed by the idea that all of us come from the same place. We're all going to the same place. So we should take every minute that we have here to make lives better for each other. So that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Hello, buenas noches. I'm here because I live at the border. I'm a native of the valley, and being at the border, we respond to a human reality that we see every day. And since 2014 to now, and we've done it even before that, where we've seen great numbers of families coming into our country. And the Rio Grande Valley is the sector that receives 80% of everybody that enters the country of the United States. And the community there, with me, have responded in a humanitarian way to restore the dignity of these families.
My name is Fernando Stein. I am a native of Guatemala. I am a pediatrician, and I am the immediate past president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, an organization of 66,000 pediatricians, the largest pediatric organization in the world. I became a doctor because I believe that serving is a privilege. And I have prepared for all of my life to be a leader. And I think that everyone in this room is a leader, even though you may not know it already, or you better be prepared, because often the problems select us rather than we selecting the problem. And when we are called to lead, we have no choice but to listen for that calling and say, I am my brother's keeper.
So calling and cruelty and our children, and to bring back respect and honor again. We're going to invite everyone into this conversation now. I'm going to invite you to first listen to the instructions before you move. Okay? So in a minute, I'm going to ask you to move. And when you move and find two other people, I invite you to do exactly what happened here. To introduce yourself to the two other people, and then to discuss among yourselves what is at the core of your heart of why you are here tonight. And it might really be because Sister Martha Ann Kirk told you to be here. How many are here for that? Right, okay. Wave your hand. But I do believe that probably even for the students, that there is a deeper core heart of the matter that brings you here. So are your instructions clear? That part? Okay, now I'm going to invite you to stand up. Wait. Find two other people you've never talked to before in your life, and find a place to sit down with them and have this conversation. Now you can stand up. So we got just a little bit of time. So I'm going to invite you to move just this way a little bit. So you give yourself just a little bit more elbow
I have
room.
no problem moving to the left.
You have problems moving to the left?
I have
That
no
is
problem.
good. That is really good. Took me a second. But just to give you each person a little bit more space. Look a little tight.
Okay?
But I also want to make sure that that camera's getting you,
Yeah.
okay? They don't need me, but I do need all of you. So just a little bit, she's working her credits here. What did you do? Is this, when was this? A little bit more, you can do that. Okay, there you go. More elbow works great. You know that. Does this one work? You used it. It works. Next, I'm going to call them back together, and I'm going to remind them of the title of this, and then Hope is going to give about 5 minutes, kind of setting the stage and the facts, and then we're going to go into your conversation. And what I need to do is look at the clock. About 30 more seconds, so make sure you find a seat.
Treinta segundos más.
Sí. That's what I got.
20 more seconds.
Do you see Hope? Uh-huh. And if we could all take a seat, please.
Everybody, please take a seat.
I usually have a very loud voice. It just must be this mic. Is that? If we could all take our seats, or a seat.
Move when I spoke.
So I hope you've all found some new best friends. This is exciting. I want to talk about this. And so at this point, I want to introduce the troublemaker who put this all together. But just to remind us that we're here tonight because of the crisis that's being experienced with our children in terms of the detention among immigrants and the trauma to the mind and the body and the spirit. And we have a lot as a community, San Antonio, to say thank you to Hope Frye tonight from California, who, brave soul that she is, she decided to organize this tonight plus a caravan tomorrow, but she organized it from California for us Texans. So look, anything is possible. Californians working with Texans. Might be easier for Californians to believe, but it's a harder for Texans. But anyway, so it's my humble honor to introduce Hope to you tonight, and she's coordinated from a distance, as I said. She's the executive director for Project Lifeline, who's put this together tonight, as well as the caravan that's going tomorrow morning. She's the past president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. She's also the past chair of the board of the Center for Human Rights and Constitutional Law. And she's going to help kind of set the stage for us tonight with some facts of the system. And so I invite you to welcome her in our midst to Texas, but also to thank her for what she has done for us tonight. So, Hope.
Hey, San Antonio. Do I have it?
Let's borrow this one. It works.
San Antonio, I came down here and I said, oh, San Antonio, what? San Antonio. And San Antonio said, we stand up in San Antonio. I went, oh, it's Texas, people stand up. I've had a wonderful time. I've been here on the ground quite a bit, probably almost a full month since I've been planning this. And I have had the most wonderful time getting to know San Antonio and San Antonians. You are smart, big-hearted, welcoming, generous people, and you've made me feel wonderful, and you've welcomed me into your homes, and you've told me your stories, and you've worked with me, and I appreciate it so much. And I'm so pleased that we have this wonderful program tonight with people who have also come from other places, as you heard, from Baylor and Stanford and New Braunfels. And the Rio Grande, and thanks to all of them bringing their expertise. Project Lifeline is founded out of the current disaster. 134,000 children detained in immigration facilities every year in horrible, inhumane conditions. And I know about these conditions because I lead delegations of lawyers that inspect centers and talk to children based on an agreement, a court agreement called the Flores Settlement. Flores settled a case by Jenny Flores, a 15-year-old child detained in Los Angeles, in an old dilapidated hotel, detained with women and children and nothing to do. And lawyers in 1997 settled that case and said, these are the things you have to do to have decent, honorable conditions and quick release for children. Well, here we are 21 years later, and we're still talking about these inhumane conditions. And we go in the detention centers, and we can tell you that the children do not have enough to eat, that they are thirsty, that they're drinking water out of the back of the toilet, that the places are kept so cold that you can't get warm. Even if you had a blanket, they had no blankets. If you're cold, you come in wet from the river, you stay cold, wet from the river. If you're injured, you're told not to say anything, because if you do, you'll stay longer. Those are the initial point of contact, the Customs and Border Protection Centers. We have a big one here where the caravan is going tomorrow in McAllen, Texas, called the Ursula Detention Center. From a Customs and Border Patrol Center, children with families are taken to a family facility run by ICE, and somewhere in here. Yeah, we'll get to that. In here are the acronyms, ICBP, all of them. Here's what they mean. They go to family facilities that are run by ICE, but they are owned and profited by CoreCivic, GEO, and Southwest Keys, and ORR shelters, Office of Refugee shelters that are for unaccompanied kids. So that's where we find ourselves. We find ourselves in a world of suffering, of children who have no voices, who are hidden and forgotten. And until this current crisis, when suddenly people became aware of these conditions because of the 3,000 children taken from their parents, nobody knew. Well, we know today, and we know that we're causing suffering, we're causing trauma, we have long-term trauma effects, and we want today to understand what they are so we can better talk among ourselves, think more strategically, and come up with new ideas to help us solve problems to this tremendous crisis. And I thank the panelists for being here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hope. So we're going to turn to our panel now, and they've come all this way, so we might as well spend some time, right? So you've all spent a little bit of time talking about what is at the heart and the core of this matter that brings you here. But what informs that heart and that core is what I think we really need to hear. And Norma, Sister Norma, you were telling us earlier about a story, and I was wondering if you would share that with us that happened to you.
Yes, of course. Back in 2014, when we, in the Rio Grande Valley, specifically in McAllen, Texas, the families of the valley, we started to see families just outside of the bus station, and we began to see that there was a problem. There was something going on in the Rio Grande Valley, and we all just heard all these children were overwhelming the Border Patrol. And so I asked the local judge to give me permission to go inside the facility where they were keeping the children, and I did. I was one of the privileged persons, the first persons that was able to go inside this facility, which was a processing facility where they just capture the immigrants as soon as they enter the country. They're apprehended, processed in that facility, which can only hold, capacity-wise, 300 at one time. It's small, because all they do is process them and then distribute them to other locations where they need to go. So they don't keep them there. The facility does not have the conditions, not a kitchen, not showers, not even restrooms. They just have a toilet in the cell that is open, and if a person in that cell needs to go to the restroom, that's where they go. So this facility, this little small area that can only hold 300 people at one time, was holding over 1,000. And out of the 1,000 people they were holding in this facility, they were all children. 5, 6, 7 years old. Chiquitos, you know? And so I walked into that area where they have all these cells with a big glass window and all the little faces, just looking through them full of tears. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So I asked the officers, let me in. Let me go in to see the children. And they said, nope, you can't go in there. And I said, I want to pray with them, you know. So I'm a nun, so I got away with that. I got in. But for me, going in was the one thing in my life that has pierced me so tremendously. Walking into that cell with way over 100 or 200 kids all around me, all crying, looking up to me with their faces full of tears, telling me, por favor, sácame de aquí. Please get me out of here. No puedo respirar. I can't breathe. I want to see my mama. So together it says, we were all crying. And I just said, reza conmigo, vamos a rezar. And as I said, Dios Padre, they would just echo with me everything that I said as they were crying and hoping something could happen, that I could do something magical and get them out of there. And I could see through the windows, the officers were looking at us. And you could see that they were moved, that their faces were about to be in tears themselves. So all you could see is these kids, chiquitos, you know, here, crying, not understanding why they were there and why they were separated from mom. I walked out of there, and the officer in charge tells me, Sister, thank you. You've made us realize that human beings. It was terrible. They were dirty and muddy and all the same color, grayish, because they hadn't had a chance, not one day, not 1 week, several weeks in those conditions. It's hard to understand how we here in the United States could allow that.
I think I also hear in that story the use of language and how you were able to use another language. Can I just go in and pray with them? It's another language, right? And it opened a door. So in this movement of understanding, and we have doctors here, and we've got theologians here, and frankly, doctors and theologians use different languages, even if you're speaking English. So I was listening earlier to Helen and Paul talking about the importance of language. Could you say a little bit more about language in the detention centers and what you've experienced?
I recorded the testimonies of the families as they wept with me. I wept with them as we prayed together. And they use words in a technical sense that if we don't listen carefully, we don't understand what they're saying. And you'll often hear one of the mothers say, I'm here for a better life. And we hear that and we say, oh, the sweet life, the Sept, the early retirement, they're just going to send home money to their families. No. When they say better life, they simply mean bare life. Life. Nothing fancy. Life. One mother said to me, I came to the United States because I want to see my daughter smile. That doesn't seem too much to ask. I want to see my daughter smile. You hear the word delinquent. Well, delinquent in the United States usually means juvenile delinquency. You maybe do a little toilet paper, you maybe throw some eggs, you maybe put some for sale signs on someone's yard. The house really isn't for sale. Delinquency in the terms of the mothers means life and death. And so one of the things that I promised the mothers as I was doing the Art of Spiritual Care inside this detention center, I said, Pastor Helen, I have a very big mouth. Whatever you want the world to know, with your permission, I will share. And so to honor my promise to the families, I want to share one of their testimonies. Hello, my name is Maria. I have 2 children, Eric and Denesi. I decided to leave because there is so much violence. One is unable to live peacefully. There are so many delinquents. They kill people on all sides. It is very dangerous for my children. I decided to leave my country to look for a better place, to live peacefully, without delinquency, without fear. Our government does nothing. They ignore the delinquents. The delinquents continue to murder, to assault. The government does nothing. The police do not protect anyone. Because God loves us, we are here.
I'm going to talk about the language of responsibility, because that is the language that I keep hearing from people who support the kind of policies we're discussing here tonight. How can the parents, if they were responsible, allow their kids to be put in this situation in the first place? It's a language of responsibility which resonates here in America. And of course, when I hear the language of responsibility, I can only think of my experiences in Highland, Guatemala over the past 45 years. I think of those stories, I think of the parents I know, and the dangers that their kids risk every day. But my job is also as an analyst. I'm a researcher. I have an analytic voice. The most dangerous place in the world right now is Syria. Number 2 is Venezuela. Number 3, 4, 5, Honduras, Salvador, Guatemala. Next, Iraq. Next, Afghanistan. Next, Yemen. We don't often realize that the risk of violent death in Central America is extreme. So when people talk about responsibility of the parents, I think of the stories and the numbers from Guatemala, from Honduras and Salvador, and the risks that they run with their kids as they come through Mexico and then cross the border, and know that not only are the parents of the children who have now been separated responsible, but they are loving parents. So the language of responsibility gets turned on its head if you really understand the real situation.
You know, Marcia, you were talking about responsibility earlier as well, but you were talking about it from another angle. I think you were talking about our responsibility, might even be our complicity. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, I can say yes. I kind of alluded to it because the cruelty, as Sister Norma mentioned too, is meted out by us on the border. You know, lots and lots and lots of our brothers and sisters and children along the border are Border Patrol or ICE agents because it's one of the best jobs you can get. And so they're so conflicted. And what they're told is so different than how they were raised, how they see the community. So our community is a conflicted community because of that. But at the same time, I get the privilege of working with many of the people sitting up here with me, and especially Sister Norma. And our community is a community of hospitality. And in our community, the word, the way we live our lives, is hospitality. And so I think that the gestures and what we do to offer hospitality begins the healing on the border. But I also really wanted to talk about the first question, just briefly, about, what informs us. And for me, like many of you who have spoken, Helen so beautifully too, and Paul on the families for 4 years, I've worked with Catholic Charities, either in Brownsville when we had a respite center there, or in McAllen. So many of the things that the stories I hear and the families I get to know are there, but they're also inside the Border Patrol Processing Center. And so I have told this story before because this man will forever be in my heart. But it was Thanksgiving 2 years ago, 2016, when we were seeing 400 a day, and we didn't have enough volunteers, and we were it was night and day, and we had not enough volunteers, and so the immigrants started being, if you came in at 3 o'clock and you got processed and got all the things you needed and a shower, then by 7 o'clock you were helping the next group that was coming in, and you put on the green vest and you did that. And so it was a very busy time. It was a frightening time, but it was also one of the holiest times. And it's where sometimes I would leave the van to just clean the bathrooms, because we had 4 stalls for 400 people, 400 for the women, 4 for the women and 4 for the men, and they needed cleaning, and it's like washing feet. But during that time, it was cold, and I was on the medical van, and this Honduran man came in, and my daughter, who is also a physician, was there helping me, and we saw this Honduran man with his little boy who had a cold, and they came in, and this was this most dignified, most handsome, tall Honduran man, and so Summer, my daughter, was taking the vitals of the little boy and listening to his heart, and I turned to the father and I asked him, is his mother here, or is she back in Honduras, or is she in New Jersey where you're going? And he stood there and stayed ramrod stiff. But he started putting his hands on his eyes like this, both. And tears started flooding down his face. And it was as if he couldn't stop the river of tears. And he said, "They took her and my girls from me." This was 2 years ago. This was not this summer. They took them away and they put them somewhere else, and we don't know where they are. That stays in your heart. And he was like, "I need someone to help me find the rest of my family." And then this year, before zero tolerance, actually it was in December of 2017, I brought some physicians from Texas Children's down, and they went into the Border Patrol Processing Center, and we walked in, and it's there's 2 processing centers really. There's the one Sister Norma talked about, which is the old one, which is the initial one, which is horrifying, and then there's Ursula, which is the one you've seen, that the parera, that is the cages, where both are very, very cold, but they're not concrete, they're cages. And I brought these doctors, and we're standing back outside, and we've seen the films about what great work that our Border Patrol does and how they chase down the bad guys, and they do. And we're hearing all of this, and they take us back and say, we get to go into the front part. In just a minute, we'll go through this door. And we walked through there, and we hadn't gone through the door yet, and you could hear all these children's voices, but you couldn't tell what was going on. So it would be like standing outside a gym and hearing all this racket of kids' voices. And so they opened the door, and we walked in, and I swear I was from here to her. And there was the cage, and there was more than 40 10-year-old boys in that cage. And they were sobbing in anguish. They were screaming for their mothers, and they were reaching through the cage to their mothers, who were in a cage 20 feet behind me. And the mothers were over there crying. The separation of children from their parents has been going on for years. It's just now become a policy.
Fernando, you look like you want to say something.
Yes. I'm going to stand up. I am the son of a Jewish father and a Catholic mother. My father was an immigrant from Germany, came to Guatemala, married my mother. I started going to the border in 2015 and 2016, and I had an experience at the processing center where, as the families were coming in, children were stripped from their clothing and their belongings put into plastic bags, and into the plastic bag went the teddy bears, the blankets, their bottles, their shoes, their shirts, and plastic bag to the corner. Second plastic bag, 30 plastic bags, 400 plastic bags. And when you see the mountain of plastic bags and the shoes and the shirts, and some children have painted on their bodies a telephone number with chapopote, what do you call it? Tar paint, because it's the number that may save them when they call. That image, I cannot unsee the painted and the mountain of bags, which is reminiscent of other moments in history, namely the Holocaust. And not that I would take it to that extreme, but it sure seems like it and smells like it. There is a moment in history, and the reason I'm going into this is because I think that part of our duty here is to give you talking points, to give you reference points in history that are akin to this. And I call it the biology of hope. During the Spanish Civil War, when they had adolescents fighting each other for the two sides that were at war in the Civil War, there came a policy from one of the sides that was to kill young children so that they wouldn't grow up to be adolescents and fight them. And as they started killing children as part of the policy, Spaniards started exporting children, and they went to Italy and to Venezuela and Mexico in the thousands. Because the families were making a decision pretty much like the one the families are doing in the Trifino in Mexico, in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, travel through Mexico and so on. Because it's the biology of hope, is the only way out that they see for their children to survive when they have to make the heart-wrenching decision to let their children die from gun or famine. So as we have these conversations, we need to also remember that when the Second War was looming, there was what was called the Kindertransport. children that were at risk for being killed because they were Jews, not only in Germany, but in Poland and in many of the places where the Nazis tried to exterminate the Jews. They exported children, and 10,000 went to London, and anybody that could be saved was sent away by their parents, pretty much in the same conditions of desperation that is causing the migration. Both Dr. Colleen Kraft, who is the current president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and myself have said repeatedly that children do not immigrate, they flee. So as we continue to see these expressions of hope that are the result of horrible situations, I urge all of us to bring about the reality of things, the truth about it, that this is nothing but human, and that we use the talking points and be ready to fight with our words when there is all of these distortions of the truth. And finally, there has been this new suspicion of people in academia, educators, and the press that somehow what we say is a lie and is elitist. And this has been present in totalitarian regimes, again, throughout history in the 19th and the 20th century. So as we hear, I think that any one of us can tell stories that would break your heart. But one of the reasons that we shouldn't see pornography or violent content is because we cannot unsee things that we have seen or unhear things that we have heard. And why have we not seen these images on television? Because they don't want you to see it. Thank you.
So what you were talking about too, no thank you. The biology of hope, it makes me also think, I mean, just listening to you when you're telling the stories, one would even say in the service industry, probably some of you are experiencing vicarious trauma because you're taking in the images, you're taking in the pain. But what kind of impact is what's happening on the ground? What kind of impact is that having on the children biologically, emotionally, spiritually? Can someone say something to that? What's that impact of trauma?
A lot of times in the language of religion and faith, we talk about what we believe and what we are named. There's a lot of language in the Christian scriptures about names. And I think we have to talk about this language of naming and the language of acceptance. When we hear these stories, I think our first reaction is we cannot accept this as okay. As American citizens, we cannot say, okay, we accept this or we consent to this. We as a nation are hearing this all day yesterday. We heard it shouted today on the national news in an elevator when a woman yelled at a senator saying, "Does my suffering matter?" And we all say, yes, human suffering matters. We have to say that. When we hear that little girl this summer, when they leaked the sound of that little girl crying out and shouting for her mother, it had already been heard, but then the nation hears it and says, we do not accept human suffering. But then there's the other side of what these refugees are accepting about themselves, what they have received in their hearts, what they received in their bodies, what they received in their minds. We have to very quickly, as soon as possible, begin trauma-informed responses with this population. We have to douse every sector of our society with trauma-informed responses to this population. Not just in medicine, not just in the hospitality, but also in the schools. And we have to begin that process. And it's very simple. In our hospitality house, you can begin by just haciendo la masa, like making tortillas. Right? And then using the hands, and these women are beginning to use their hands, and they're pressing out the tortillas, and their children are playing on the floor, and they're putting the tortillas on the comal, and it smells, and then they begin to, it's like clockwork. They pull up their pant legs, and they show you the GPS shackle, and they say, I want you to see what this is. And then there are very clear trauma-informed prayer techniques that we can do, and it brings up so much. And there's this shuddering moment, and it's very, very intense, and yet we say, we're not afraid of the trauma, we're afraid of you accepting it and letting it live down there for too long. And then I remember vividly this one young woman who had been raped so many times and had seen her father tortured, and she's saying, así es la vida, así es la vida. That's how life is, she's saying. And we have to, as human beings, say, that is not how life has to be. And there is hope, and there is healing, and that is what we will accept. And that is what we are convicted by and called by.
Aisha, did you want to say something?
So my specialty is talking about the health of populations, right? And with 134,526 kids in detention, indefinitely, we need to, of course we have to talk about the health of the children, but we also need to talk about the health of the population as a whole. We know that from our experiences in refugee camps, in humanitarian crises, we know that populations that are placed into isolation like this, that have fled somewhere, they're in a community that is not their home, they're isolated away from the mainstream, they've lost their identity, they go through 3 different kinds of adverse events. In the beginning, children, they can't sleep, they can't toilet, they have trouble learning, they have difficulties with their nutrition. These are all, very acute things that are happening right now. After this, when the children are finally released, when they are able to be in a community, whether that's a community of their peers, or they're assimilated into their new home, or sent back to their old home, they suffer from depression, they suffer from anxiety, they suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. And the one that I find the most difficult is it is very difficult for them to form relationships, either with a loved one, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a husband, a wife, a friendship. It's difficult for them to have normal relationships because their methods of attachment have changed forever. And then even beyond this, if they're able to get past all that, if they're able to find a job, which it is more difficult for them to do, they suffer the effects of chronic illness. The effect of the trauma is so deep that much the way your heart was tattooed, their bodies are tattooed forever with the trauma. So they suffer from high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes. All of these conditions that we would expect when they're much, much older actually come about at a younger age. And these are things that they end up living with their whole life if they live with the trauma. But as you were saying, and this is the part that gives me the most hope, there's a lot of evidence that shows that children are very resilient. And far from being a hopeless message, I think it's really important to realize that our actions right now will determine the future. Not only our future, not only the future of our community, not only the future of what it means to be an American, but also the future of this entire population of children that are in detention right now if we can give them hope, if we can give them faith, it will completely change their health. And one way of doing this is very much like what you were talking about. There are other techniques, art, communication, talking through the traumas that happened to them, music, any form of creation, a form of giving them agency, some choice over what their life will be, can restore dignity to them, can restore their sense of being a human being, and can restore their health. And to me, I think that's one of the most powerful messages when I learn about these awful things that have happened to so many populations around the world, and particularly now, that we can turn it around. We can believe in the future of each and every child that's in detention right now. It doesn't have to be this way. Still, now, what we do is going to make the difference.
Marcia wants to add something.
I just wanted to say ditto to everything that Aisha just said, because we have years of evidence in pediatrics about the effects of this. And what she's talking about, which I think is our responsibility, is the fact that when they get that scared, that terrorized, their bodies, every organ in their body is flooded with these hormones of fight and flight. And that changes their DNA. It is washing their brain, it is washing over their heart, and it makes changes. But also the one thing we know is if they have one trusted friend, one trusted person in their life that can make sense of the world and what's happened to them and that they can trust in, then they begin to see that hope again. You can see that we can assuage many of those effects and it starts to change. But what that means is we can't just go, oh, well, it's the mom's job to do that, or it's the dad. It's because that's what I think is why I love being on the border, is that at Catholic Charities and in my clinic, I can be that person. I can be one of those first persons. Why should it be one? Why isn't it a whole community? And when they get to San Antonio and when they get to California, there's a community ready to be those thousands of people that give that to them, that welcome them in for that better life, which just meant life. And so we've seen the physical changes in their body when that happens. And so that's our responsibility, not just their families.
Sister Norma.
I just want to add to what Dr. Marcia just said as well. I have seen this day after day after day since 2014, nonstop, every single day. We've received way over 100,000 immigrants at our respite center in McAllen. And you can see how they walk through that door. From the moment that we walked into the respite center, they change. They begin to see these welcoming volunteers, just simple people from the community, people from all over the United States that decide that they were called to say, I want to go see, I want to be able to be part of this humanitarian response. And when they see these families, these faces, welcoming faces, diciendo bienvenidos, and with a smile, that transformation in that person instantly begins to take place. A human person begins to become a person again. And not only on them, but on us as well, as we also offer to welcome them, to be present to them. We begin to become persons again. You know, it's amazing, like we reclaim our personhood, you know. We care. We become a presence that those children, you know, what we do in the respite center is a short term, really quick. They come in for a couple of hours, immediately help them get cleaned up, take a shower. That shower is magical. The moment that we were able to have showers at the respite center was amazing. The women walked into that shower, and that water went through them and cleansed them. It almost is they cleanse them not only of the dirt and the mud, but of all that pain and horror they've been through so many weeks and months. And what they've experienced there, you could almost hear the cries while they're taking that shower. You know, it's amazing. And the children that walk, you could see in their faces that they have a heart. They've been through so much. And all of a sudden, they see a playground with toys. And they walk into that playground. It's almost as if that magical playground. They stop being that kid that was so angry and upset and not understanding life. And all of a sudden, they become children again. And they start playing with one another. It is amazing how we all must be part of that response and come and be present and be there for that person, and you will know what I'm talking about.
Helen, you wanted to say something?
Yes, I wanted to share something that a volunteer at the bus station from the Interfaith Welcome Coalition shared with me. She said that, you could say that in these moments that I sit here waiting to receive families, waiting to welcome them, and I mean, in some regards, it's so very little to do. It's almost nothing in the big system of all the brokenness going on. But she said, it is worth it in that moment as I welcome and greet the one family, and it is welcome in that moment to me, for it heals my spirit, it heals my soul as I offer genuine hospitality, genuine welcome. And so we think that we're doing such a great thing of helping and welcoming, but really, the gift that we receive back is beyond description. Anyone who's had any direct interaction with helping the families and the children would say that it is an amazing gift, a gift beyond all, for it does reclaim our humanness, and it reminds us that we are beloved children of God, and we remember it in the presence of the refugee other.
Fernando, you wanted to say something?
I think it's a time for a commercial break. If your heart was stirred by that and you want to be a part of the Interfaith Welcome Coalition, you indeed could do that here in San Antonio. And you could wear a blue vest like these beautiful women sitting in the middle of the room. If you're also
Or wear the green vest in the valley, huh?
we're going to start snapping in just a second. How many people have volunteered with the Interfaith Welcome Coalition? Look for those hands and grab those people before you get out.
I think you should actually stand up. Yeah. Now let's see those bodies. Please stand up. One of the things I've been hearing up here are very human things. Yeah. The smile, the face, the body that greets.
The other thing is we can be very overwhelmed, especially if we don't have a doctor in front of our name, by some of the wealth of knowledge and where in the world do we begin. The Interfaith Welcome Coalition is a great place to begin in a very humble way. Also, if you're interested in trauma, there is a lot of research about realistic next steps that you can take. And there's an institute at TCU called the Trust-Based Relationship Intervention. And we have a grant that will provide those who are interested with free training in responding to trauma in this way. You can contact the Mennonite Church downtown if you want to be a part of that training. And I think we always are coming back to the fact that not only are children resilient, and not only is the human body and brain resilient, but these folks are more resilient. I mean, these folks are absolutely heroic. And when we brush up against them, it's so obvious that these women and these children and these fathers and these children are so strong, and they are so brave, and their journey is sacred, absolutely sacred. It's a journey of sacred self-sacrificial love. It doesn't get more sacred than that. And we get a chance to touch it, to brush up against it, to bear witness to it. And we can only give thanks for that. and feel that fire, feel that blessing.
Fernando, and I think Paul, did you?
I volunteered for a few hours when we went with the American Academy of Pediatrics at the Sacred Heart with Marcia, and I asked for some duty, and there were many, many moments that we could narrate, and each one of us can tell stories that bring all of us to tears, including ourselves as we're telling the story. But as the families walk into the center, the volunteers line up in 2 lines, and they receive them with applause so that they feel welcome. And then as you are giving them clean clothes for them to wear that are usually donated and they are used but in good condition, they assign me to give clothing to the female adolescents. And I would bring 4 or 5. And no, I don't like that one. No, the jeans are too long or not blue enough, and they knew exactly what they were doing. I was going back and forth to the and then they finally said, Fernando, no, you bring an ugly one and a beautiful one, and you give them which one of the 2 you want. So they can be mischievous. They look very good, but watch it.
Paul, did you want to add something?
Well, I just wanted to comment about the question you asked about the toll that it takes on the people who are serving these communities, the people in detention and when they leave. Health workers are always the ultimate inheritors of a failed social order. Sooner or later, the broken bonds of community life, fear of extreme violence, the destruction of the rule of law will ultimately be expressed in the clinics, on the wards, or in the morgue. And for people working to serve people struggling against a failed social order also bear a huge burden. And I lied earlier when you asked, why am I here? And I said, because this is cruel and we need to speak up. But there's also a second reason, and that is to provide solidarity to my colleagues and friends and to all the people who are serving these communities. Because some will find solace in faith, some workers will find comfort in a secular embrace of justice. But the feeling of being alone and doing this work, there is no protection from that. And solidarity is the greatest protection, the greatest source of motivation and energy for all the people working on the border, working with these families. The lawyers, the health workers, the social workers, pastors, priests. And so your presence tonight is solidarity. And my hope would be that you continue to seek ways, mechanisms of granting solidarity to the people engaged in a life service. I should mention that Dr. Griffin will be recognized with the highest award, she hates this, I know, but the highest award of the American Academy of Pediatrics. It's a reflection of the respect that the profession has for Marcia, but it's also a recognition that solidarity at this moment is also crucial. And my hope would be that you all find ways to convey solidarity in your communities, to the communities on the border, people struggling every day, including giving some of them up here a hug before you leave.
Before we go on, since you mentioned that list,
I want to
go
just
ahead.
really quickly, Paul and Hope and Lisa, many of the folks from Stanford and I are working on a new project to help the attorneys. So be in solidarity with our immigration attorneys And because often they are the most traumatized because they work so hard, they hear the stories, they have to look for the worst stories and get them to tell them in a way that it would turn a judge or get them asylum. And lately, it's been harder and harder and harder to get positive asylum outcomes. And so they weep over the lost children that they know they couldn't win. And so hug an attorney. Hug an immigration attorney.
I just wanted to take a minute, though, since you mentioned both of those things. I want to invite any immigration attorney in the room to stand. And don't sit down. Please stay standing. Tino, you need to stand, man. I know you. He's our immigration liaison for the city. Let's see, who else did you list, Paul? Nurses. Do we have any nurses here who work with immigrants? We're practicing solidarity right now. Yeah. Nurses. Do we have any doctors who work with immigrants? You guys need to stand here. Doctors who work with immigrants. Don't sit down. Please keep standing. This is an act of solidarity. Any social workers?
Oh, let's hear it for social workers.
That work with immigrants. Keep standing. And a favorite crop of mine, any nuns that work with immigrants. No, you guys got to keep standing. This is an act of solidarity. Keep standing. Who else did you mention, Paul?
You're not a nun, Fernanda.
Yeah, you have to keep standing. He was a doctor. You keep standing. We're doing an act of solidarity. What did you say? Teachers. Any teachers who work with immigrants? This is a solidarity thing. Keep standing. Any teachers? Any clergy? Clergy who work with immigrants. Okay. Who else did you say, Paul? Well, anyone else who works with immigrants? Stand up. Anyone else who wants to work with immigrants? There you go. That's everywhere. So now you know who you need to hug, right? Okay. Also a good stretch break. So I'm curious, and we've already kind of made the turn, but if we can even open up our imaginations a little bit about, like what can we do? So the hope, what I really marvel at by listening to these stories is just the very basic human acts. And, being a Christian clergy, I mean, that's the Jesus thing. Listening, walking, feeding, talking, showers, smiling, being in the presence, all these things. John, I'm really curious about what one of those prayer practices is that makes a difference when you're trauma-informed. I want to know what one of those is. And so I'm inviting everyone else to think of very specific ways that we can turn it.
There are a number of practices. One takes a while. One is 30 seconds, and it's a way to listen to your own identity. And you begin by asking them the question, "What is your favorite color?" And then you say, "What's your shoe size?" And then you say, "What would you like to eat for dinner?" And then you say, "Are you a child of God?" And then you say, "Is God ever going to leave your heart?" And then we begin to pray. Another is to envision a safe place and to feel that safe place. And sometimes that takes a little while, and so we wait, and then when it's there, we begin and we say, "You're in a safe place now." And you can feel that safe place. smell that safe place. And then, because we're Christian, we say, and almost all of the folks that we receive are also Christian, we say, see Jesus right there next to you. And even though all around you is this darkness and the fear and the threats, you are in a safe place, and Jesus is right there. Turn to Jesus and say, what do you love about me? And then just listen. And then from there, the practice begins. But it's moving from this, you have been attacked physically, you've been attacked mentally, you've been attacked spiritually, and we're going to move down into a place in your heart where your identity, which can never, ever, ever change, where that lies. And then we'll pray out of that place.
I have one very concrete ask. In the Divine Comedy, when the guide takes Antonio to hell, and they go to the darkest place of hell, he says, and this, the darkest place in hell, is reserved for the people that in the face of indignity remain neutral, remain silent. From the Holocaust to the AIDS epidemic to what's happening in the border, any one of us that doesn't tell the story is complicit. We have to raise our voices.
My ask is that we become educated, that we genuinely seek to know, to understand, and to learn. Yes, it's possible to have fake news, but there are some very credible sources where you can learn the reality of what's going on. I've recently finished researching and writing a book, and I spent several weeks on the Immigration Customs Enforcement website, which is pretty appalling and disgusting to do. But you can learn and see facts of the realities of how many people we are keeping from even coming to our border, where they're inadmissible. You can learn for yourself what's going on. So I invite you to become educated, and so that you can make an informed response back with the reality of what is happening in our country. It is very, very important that we are educated and aware of this, of the broad circumstance around this issue, and that we then exercise with our voices and our feet that we can begin to make a difference.
I would invite you to bring down the walls that keep you from reaching out. You know, all those barriers. There's a lot of walls that keep us, whether it's fear or time or busyness or whatever it is that keeps me wandering or not doing something to reach out and be there for that person or that family or the immigrant. You know, what is keeping you from being there for the other? I see daily so many volunteers that amaze me. They're true champions for me because, my goodness, it's a father or people, just ordinary people that choose to show up and see and be there, and then they're stuck there. They just are drawn to come back and go take the person to the bus. This man that appeared out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, I'm here to help. And he goes every day. And sometimes we can be there until 10, 11, or 12 at night, but we can't go until we help the very last person to make sure that person is okay. And then you can go back home and go to sleep, and you feel good. But those people that I see daily, giving of their time so generously, and making sure that those families, those children can recapture that sense of life again, just by you being present in their life. And it's so simple, just being there. So I ask you, if you're afraid or if anything is keeping you from reaching out to the other, to that person that you see there before you, bring down those barriers, those walls.
I think I have one. Oh. Yeah? Okay, cool. So I see a lot of young people here, and a lot of what we are talking about is volunteer as a doctor, volunteer as a faith leader, volunteer as whatever. But you don't have to have all of that. All of you have something you can give. How many of you like hip-hop? young people especially. Raise your hand. I do. I'm gonna raise my hand. Really? That's it? What do you guys listen to in Texas? No? Not? Okay. All right. I'm gonna use the example of hip hop. You substitute the word country wherever I say hip hop. So there is a movement in hip hop called slingshot hip hop. And this is what it's based on. There's a professor of psychiatry who went to a bunch of refugee camps in Palestine, so the West Bank and Gaza. And he talked to the kids there, very much like the children that we have coming in our borders here. And he gave them all screening tests to see if they suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. 80% of them suffered from PTSD. 80%. If you're surprised, I hope you're surprised that 20% didn't, right? Because they have been through hell, right? Definitely had a lot of trauma. The 20% that didn't, he sat down and did interviews with them and said, what is it that you do? And all of them would pick up little pebbles, put it in their slingshot, and fire it at Israeli tanks. It's a little pebble. It's not doing anything to the tank. But in their mind, that was giving them control over their circumstances, and that was their act of resistance. And from that, a group of kids, I say kids, they were probably like, I don't know, 17, 18, 19, 20. This was, I guess, late 90s, early 2000s. They started watching all of these like videos on MTV. MTV showed videos back then. And there were videos of Tupac and Biggie and NWA. These are all groups that used to write about the circumstances they lived in. They used to write songs of resistance. And they said, man, Compton is a lot like the West Bank. It's a lot like Gaza. And they started writing hip hop, and it was horrible, really terrible, to start with. But actually now it's really good. If you Google slingshot hip hop, you can find it on YouTube. And that act of writing those songs, when they took it to the refugee camps, helped kids feel like they had some control over their life. They had some way of resisting, some way of making their voices heard. And it was kids, right? Like I say kids very broadly. So young people who started to learn to write hip hop, and they took it to the refugee camps, and they helped them craft little beats, little songs. My 10-year-old nephew, after watching Hamilton, cannot stop beatboxing. So whatever it is that you know how to do, you can use it. If you make art, if you play the ukulele, if you write country songs, whatever it is that you do, there's something you do that you can teach kids to do that can be their form of expression, that can give them a voice. And if you can do nothing else, Project Lifeline is going to start a great program where these kids get to have pen pals. If you can write a letter, if you can be that one person on the outside that reaches out to those kids, writes them a letter, and lets them know that there is an American on American soil that cares about them deeply, that welcomes them here, that wants to know what they're going through, that wants to talk to them about what kind of clothes they're wearing, what color are their jeans, are they too long, is the dress pretty enough? Whatever it is that you're doing, I bet you those kids are interested in knowing as well. And I don't think that the project is up and running yet, but if you want information, go to the Project Lifeline website. It's projectlifeline.us, it's not .com.
It's in the brochure.
It's in the brochure. Go there, contact us, contact Hope, contact whoever is around you, and find out some way to volunteer even a little bit of your time. I bet you there's tons of organizations that, oh, look at that, Hope is plugging the website. It's on this t-shirt. Yeah, there we go. So don't feel overwhelmed by the fact that you don't have a degree or that you are not part of the clergy or not a pastor. I started volunteering when I was in high school with Habitat for Humanity, and that was the first step for me. And all it really took was breaking down what was a lot of my own fear in actually reaching out and figuring out how to do it. And it's led me to where I am. So you all can do it. All of you have something to give, and I hope that you will.
Just quickly, in a democracy, we get the leaders we deserve. And
Ouch.
you
No,
can
I
vote.
know.
Is there an election coming up of some relevance in Texas? So please, justice demands political struggle. And that means doing your part, not only voting, but using your energy and your smarts and your money to support candidates that you feel would bring justice to the border as well as the rule of law back to this country again.
Any other insights? So we want to, again, this is a full room conversation. So before you start talking or moving, right, I'm going to give the instructions again. So this one's going to be a table exercise so that you're talking to the whole table that you're sitting at. You'll also find pens and cards there if you need to write things down. But we're going to work at the tables for about 10 minutes. So it's going to be kind of tight. But to be able to share with each other what was the one most significant thing you heard up here tonight, like the thing that was like, whoa. And so share that briefly. But then as a table, either come up with a question that you still have for the panel that you think is very significant or salient for the conversation yet tonight and our mutual learning, but also a possible action out of your imagination that might be taken. So a next step. So if each table can come up with either a question or a next step in 10 minutes of what you've heard, and then we're going to come back together and we're going to share those maybe next steps, but any questions that we still have for the panel. So we have about 10 minutes. Are we good? We're good. There's pens and things at the table.
Don't say ice cream because I'm gonna go for it. It's one of my favorites. It doesn't have to have sound, right?
It's not going to come out of those speakers. It's only going into the camera. All right, so look at you the whole time. Okay. Look at me the whole time. So, Sister, we had an amazing conversation here tonight. I mean, it just is, it's invigorating, it's heart-wrenching. What is it that you hope that people who are listening to this come away with and what they remember?
My hope is that as they hear what they've heard tonight, that they can actually, there you go, in English, right? Mm-hmm. My hope is that someone who has heard what we've shared today can leave here filled with hope, with the desire to know more about what they can do, how they can understand better the whole immigration reality, the human reality that we have before us, so they can be part of a response that brings solutions to the lives of so many families that are suffering, that are hurting, and they need our help. That they don't just listen and just go home and continue their journey to do whatever they were doing, but that something is implanted in their heart that says, I have to do something.
What a wonderful thought. Did you hear a story from one of the other panelists today that struck you?
Oh, almost everything. I had to take some notes because they were saying so many wonderful things. They're sharing, it's almost as if my vision has been amplified because they've captured experiences in other points of the whole human reality of immigration. And I was like, all of a sudden brought into an awareness, a more open awareness to this human reality that we're all encountering on a daily basis. And we are, it's almost like an aha moment of, yes, that is right. You know, it's beautiful to be present here among so many others who are professionals and dedicated and have totally given of themselves to reach out and be present to the immigrant families and the human reality that we're seeing today in our world today.
All right, well, good. Okay, so one of the things that I'm interested in is that what you hope people who are either here or watching online, what do you hope that they take away from this?
I think that the main idea of this exercise is to inform our audience what's happening and to give them some ideas as to what to say and what to do. Silence is the only thing that is not allowed. I was quoting during the exercise a passage from the Divine Comedy where Antonio is taken to the darkest place in hell. And it says, "This, the darkest place in hell, is reserved for the people that in the face of indignity remain neutral, remain quiet." And that silence has been deadly from the Second War to the AIDS epidemic to what's happening in many aspects of our country, including the separation of children at the border.
That is such a powerful message. That is such a powerful message. It really is. And it's such a timeless message, right?
Yes.
What did you learn from other panelists today? What did you hear people say that you kind of went, oh, that helps me? Or, you know?
Perhaps the most compelling part of the exercise is that each one has lived this in the first person, and as you could hear the panelists speaking, some of them were openly weeping, their voice was breaking, including yours truly, because we have lived that reality one-on-one in the first person right there at the border.
There was discussion of concern also about immigration attorneys and stuff, but you're also a first responder, you know?
Yes, and we are not immune to trauma. And although we are hardwired for compassion in our brains as human beings, there is a limit to how much one can take. But somehow we have been trained to give and to provide. And those of us that are lucky enough to have relationships, personal and professionals, that carry you, we manage.
And situations like this, I think, provide a bit of a recharge, too.
Yes, and also seeing other colleagues being supportive of one another.
That's really good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Now, we might not have time for quite every question or action, but we certainly want to hear as many as we can. So I hope that you've written something down and that there's somebody at your table that's going to be willing to say it out loud, right? We've got some people with microphones, see, up there. So, and we have one microphone now up here to share, so I'll pass it on. Is there a table who would like to go first? One back in the back there. And please let us know, well, we'll know if it's a question or a next step.
We were wondering, we were really touched by the story of the children having to give up all their belongings and then being put in bags and piled up. And we were wondering, were those possessions ever returned to the children? And if not, how did the children get the clothing and the things they need? And one of our questions, we have a bunch of them, is...
Well, let's just go that one.
Okay.
Is that one connected to it? Okay.
Yes, after they are processed, they are reunited with their possessions. And it's variable whether it's 2 days or a week, or they are reunited with their possessions.
Can those of us who are concerned about this donate things for these kids? And if so, how would we go about doing it?
I'm going to defer to the people in the front lines, like Sister Norma and Marcia, because at times there is a problem in the management of the donations. They can use clothing that is clean and usable and other things, but as to the specific needs that they have in the volunteer centers, I'm going to defer to the people in the front line.
In fact, I can answer for San Antonio. Are you from here in San Antonio? Yes. So yes, clothing is needed. It needs to be clean, in good condition, bundled and marked by gender, sizes, etc. And those things can be delivered to Catholic Charities here in town. But you have to organize it. It's not going to be one big bag of stuff, right? All right. We got another table, another question. Over here, here we go.
Okay, when Sister Norma and Aisha were mentioning about the barriers, bringing barriers down, all these refugees are coming in from Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala. What if you don't speak Spanish? How can you help?
There's a universal language that everybody understands, and there's no barriers there. You don't have to speak Spanish. I have a lot of volunteers that just speak English. And so they do a lot. You have so much to do, and you're smiling, and your presence there says so much. The ministry of presence, it's amazing. But you will be amazed at how much you can do. Okay? So.
Another table?
Hi. One of the questions that our table had was concerning if children are being sheltered in San Antonio, and if so, can someone volunteer locally to help out? If that's not possible, one of the follow-up questions would just tie to that is where can we find locations of facilities in Texas that the public and volunteers can access?
I think one of the first steps is to go to the Interfaith Welcome Coalition website and do sign up in that way. And there's also ways to give donations in that way. If you're interested in doing the training for working with this population, the San Antonio Mennonite Church has a link to that, and we're hosting those trainings. And there are a lot of different opportunities. There's sort of a spectrum of volunteer opportunities, whether volunteering with someone for 13 minutes as they go through, or an entire shift at the bus station or at the airport, or working longer hours at one of the hospitality houses. And then Sister Denise, who is one of my great heroes, just raised her hand. So give her the microphone and don't take it away.
I just can't keep my mouth shut. Here in San Antonio, there are a number of places that house unaccompanied minors, and you can volunteer at those places. I go to St. PJ Home once a week just for a couple hours, and there's plenty of people who come to help with activities or things that are needed. Like this summer, someone wanted to help, and so I asked the activities director, "What do you need?" She said, "Bathing suits." We were able to take the kids swimming. We need bathing suits. So you can contact them, see what they need, or maybe you're going to provide a party for them or something like that. But there's so many different things you can do. We were talking about I go to the Dilley Detention Center twice a week, and there's people who write cards and we're praying for you, we remember you, we're fighting for you. So there's so many things you can do in addition to the interfaith's regular activities. There's plenty of opportunities out there.
Can I respond? One of my favorite stories is a stereotypical little old lady from a mainline Protestant church. She speaks no Spanish at all, and she volunteers at the bus station once a week. She does what she can do with her limited language. She fills out the detailed forms and transfers where they're going to go on their bus journey. And then she turns it over and says, "Okay, now you speak Spanish, you finish." But then she goes on to the next person, and she uses her meticulous transferring the one thing without any Spanish at all. She has found her place. And I just lift her up as an example of not allowing language to be your fear.
Just want to add a little bit more. You can also come to the Grande Valley and have an experience right at the border, okay? Actually, we have groups from all over the place. Right now, we're receiving every week from Camden, New Jersey, and we actually take them to the border wall and down to the river so they can actually see where the families, sometimes they'll find whether it's a tennis shoe or a bottle of water, and it really connects you to that experience of how the families coming through and you see the river and then actually, sometimes we even had the opportunity to put them going into the facilities like Ursula, where the processing facilities, we were being able to do that almost every time, then they stopped. So I don't know if I can really get that back again, but visit our website, CatholicCharitiesRGB.org, and you will see how you can get involved and how you can help.
To connect with that, though, when I mentioned about the clothing going to Catholic Charities here, then that clothing also goes there because it's a direct connection. Also, as you've heard, so I'm helping the commercial, there's a caravan going tomorrow. If you're interested in going, you should come up to the stage at the end. And there's also information you'll receive, and Hope will give you that. Another table, a question, a next step. Here's one up here, Maureen, or here's one back. Okay.
Our table had the question of immigration detention without end. Does that mean that the children are going to be detained indefinitely, or what exactly does immigration detention without end mean?
Yes, that's the new plan. Where's Hope? Okay, that's Hope. Hope, you should speak to that because she knows the policy and law that is behind this. But at first it was like, don't separate the parents from their children. And now it's, okay, we won't separate them. We're just going to build a lot of family detention. So Hope, I'll let you.
I think when we wrote that title, we were thinking about two things. And one is that what we've heard here today is that the effects of detention are not just short-term, they're long-term. And for some people, even if they're not in jail anymore, detention never ends. The trauma is so deep. So you don't have to keep people in a cage to keep them in a cage. What's happened, though, is that the policy that we've seen, zero tolerance, was just a policy of prosecuting people for the crime of entering illegally. That policy became the separating of parents from their children. It morphed, but it represents something that's culminated in the issuance of proposed rules. And these rules would detain all families indefinitely through the course of their immigration proceedings. So if you're lucky enough to get in a deportation proceeding and you are lucky enough to live in San Antonio, it's 4.5 years if I get in a proceeding today until I can have my first court case. That's my first court case. That's 4.5 years. If I lose that case and I've got to appeal, it's another 4.5, 5 years. And that's today. The backlogs will grow. It's not going to go like that. So if you talk about being detained until you finish your cases with the backlog we've had, you could be detained indefinitely. People will be born and die in detention.
We have time for, I think, one more question before closing. Here's one.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to say to the panel, we just appreciate you guys being here, and just a lot of great information. It really just kind of sparked everyone's interest at our table and helping, so thank you. We had two questions, though. The first one was, what can we do to engage people who are ill-informed, who may think, these people are bringing their problems here, we don't want to help them, who just kind of hardened in their heart. How can we reach them? And then also, is there a plan B for, those instances where you're not able to actually get into those camps and, talk to these kids and reach these kids? Is there a plan B for those of us who want to volunteer and help?
Somebody want to answer the first question?
It's a pastor thing, but I'll just approach the second question. There is no organized plan B. This is a little bit like leaderless cells, because actually everybody is trying to do what they can. I think that we can abide by some of the principles that we have shared with you here, but I think that we're trying to fight with compassion and community organization matters that are in the territory of law and order as it is conceived by the administration. I think that in the legal area, we have our colleagues, the lawyers, who are doing what they can. But as citizens, all we can do is unite, speak up, volunteer, do what we're doing.
And vote.
And
vote. And so, did you want to answer that question?
So I spoke earlier, a couple days ago, yesterday, it's a blur, to a group of young pastors from across the United States who were very blunt and said, I'm from a congregation, they don't want to hear this. So how can we address this? And we began from a faith perspective because we were a bunch of pastors gathered. How many of you would consider yourself, and if you're not comfortable raising your hand, you don't have to, but how many would say you work from a faith perspective? That there's some kind of God, Allah, or Jesus in you somewhere, okay? So that's a really good place to begin with Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, that we are created imago Dei, in the image of God, male and female, created in the image of God. These families are also created in the image of God. They do not worship a different God. They worship and love the same God. So it's really important to begin at the point of love. And it's an interreligious point of love as well. So can we agree that we love one another? And it's also a universal religious theology tenet that love of God means love of neighbor. And we need to be able to have an open and kind and generous conversation about that. Who do we say when we love our God? We say we love our neighbor.
Also, the technique for engaging with hard hearts, I think, is important because a lot of times the hard hearts come at you with attacks and really, really mean things and very ignorant things and very racist things. It's comforting as Christians to remember that, when Jesus was introduced to folks, people responded with racism. They said, well, nothing good can come from that part of the world. And the response to that was, come and see. And that's what we do. I quote Martin Wallace a lot, saying, when we respond to mean people and hardness of heart, we reframe the story and we tell a true story. This is the come and see. Reframe the story. Tell something that's true. And if you can do the second part, this is even better. Model good behavior. So tell true stories and model good behavior, or at least do one of those things. And that's how communities are transformed, by truth and by love.
One more comment, and then we have a thank yous and a closing.
Well, I want to say my experience about one time that I had a lady come over to we had a shelter called Casa Oscar Romero, and we were receiving a lot of the immigrants back then. And this lady, I had to buy a Xerox machine and because we were filling out the asylum papers. And this lady comes and says, I'm going to sell you my Xerox machine because I'm a salesperson. But I want to let you know that I'm 100% against what you're doing here. I'm against illegals being in this country. But I'm selling my Xerox machine to you. So I said, thank you for telling me that. Let me tell you what I do and why. So I walked her through the grounds and showed her the families, and she saw and she heard. And when she comes back to the office, she turns and tells me, Sister, I am 100% in favor of what you're doing. 100%. Totally changed. That night I got a call from her husband, said, I don't know what you did to my wife. But she came home and she said, anything Sister Norma asked, you do, okay?
A perfect ending. So we have something else, okay.
Well, I just have to tell this little private story on Sister Norma because she can transform people, with the blink of an eye. And she told me this afternoon when I got here, she'd already arrived, that she almost didn't come, that they were trying to get her not to come. And I was like, who? She was supposed to go to Central America with the Border Patrol and Department of Homeland Security. I'm like, did they convince you? She's like, no, not them. I was like, well, who? She was like, it was a very tall, good-looking man. And he was like, Sister Norma, please come hear me sing. Please stay here. And she was like, please, God, don't do this to me.
So the truth speaks. Okay.
Yeah. I have my own Sister Norma stories, but I'm not going to tell them. But I have to tell you, when I started to try to do things around here, and I was trying to promote this event, and I went up to an important person in government, and I'm talking about this, and my husband, and I said, Sister Norma, boing, this side of the cheek in that ocean, this side of the cheek in that ocean. And he says to me, takes my hand, he said, you call my office on Monday. Anything we can do, you give us your short list. For Sister Norma, it's done. Oh, you couldn't hear me? I said, oh, anyway, it's just another Sister Norma.
They'll do anything for her is what it came down to for Sister Norma.
I just have to say thank you to everyone who came. It was so fantastic to have you. What a great community conversation. And what an amazing panel and spectacular panelists. Thank you. And I think San Antonio has a moderator that should go on the circuit. Thank you, Ann.
I did today, actually.
But I have to say that I am deeply grateful for myself on behalf of all the children to Incarnate Word for hosting not just this event, but allowing us to stage tomorrow's caravan, tomorrow to McAllen, our witness event. And we are going to be in the Basilica and San Juan in the Basilica itself for our program tomorrow afternoon. If you want to join us, we'll be leaving out of here just a little after 7:30, 7:45. We have paper that Mark has in the back that tell you everything you need to know. It's free to go. If there's still room on the bus, you can ride for free, and we would love to have you. You always have a couple of people who step out of nowhere and help you, and it was really nowhere because I didn't know anybody here. But I got lucky enough to meet Martin Wallace and Lauren Snow. Where are you all? Stand up, come on. Yeah. He is a digital strategist, and she is a designer and artist and graphic designer. And all the beautiful graphics that you see, all of the things you've seen all around like this, and all the cards and all the everything. There's been tons of stuff, all the Facebook. Lauren's been the artist behind all that. The digital strategy, which was really very big for both these events, quite huge, was driven by Martin, and many, many other things that Martin did, and many things that he did personally to make me able to do something like this in a place where I know no one, and I have trafficked on your good nature and your good name, and I hope I leave it in good tact. But yes, but finally, you know, in your life, I'm almost 68 years old, and in your life, you know, you always think, oh, that was a really good partner. That was a really good partner for an event. That was a really good. I got the best partner I ever had in any event I ever did in my life, and that is her over there, Sister Martha Ann Kirk. Stand up. I do not know. I do not know where she gets it from, but Martha Ann knows everybody. Every door, it's just like Sister Norma, every door magically opens. She sends these, she doesn't like it that we're going to have this big thing in front of the Ursula Detention Center on the street. She's a little worried like me about the police. She also, you know, you're not used to the sun here. You're not from here. It's the noonday, it's the sun. So what do I, next thing I know, we've got the auditorium at the San Juan Basilica. Oh, sun, okay. I'm coming back from Waco with Reverend Doctor, and I gave a panel down there, and I get a call in the car, and I hope it's Martha. What would you think about being in the Basilica for the program? I said, the Basilica? She said, yeah, the rector called and said, I see you're in the auditorium. Would you like to be in the Basilica? I said, Sister, what part of this did you need a response? Well, I didn't want to say yes until I talked to you. I mean, the Basilica, we're not in the Basilica, like that. So anyway, you can't say enough things about this woman and what a treasure she is to work with, and how embraced and taken care of, I felt, every minute of every day in every way. You are a blessing on this earth. You are a wonderful partner. You are an amazing woman. You are a warrior woman. You are strong and deep. And
she's just making the word incarnate. I've asked John if he would close us tonight.
We've heard a lot of things, and I think that our hearts have been stirred, and our minds have been stirred, but we know that all good things, all good theology, all good philosophy, all good service begins in silence. So I'm going to ask us just to spend just a moment in silence. Think now about what you heard. Think about what you feel. Think about what you're hungry for. Are you a child of God? God, we ask that you give us grace to risk our big things for good things. God, we ask that you give us the grace to not sell this moment short and to not sell ourselves short. God, this world is much too small for anything but the truth. And so we ask you to use our voices. And this world is much too dangerous for anything but love. And so we ask you to use our hands and set our hearts on fire. Amen. Let's go in peace.
I'm also from the Valley, yeah. So from San Benito. Yeah, so it's really hard. Like in the summer, I go back home, of course.